Hi, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books. Charis Books is located in Decatur, Georgia. We are the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We've been around for 45 years. I'm not broadcasting from Charis Books. I am broadcasting from my home office. I wish that we were all gathered together in person at Charis for this really exciting conversation event tonight. But I also feel really, really excited that we get to do this digitally. All of our events are recorded, so we hope that you will, if you know folks who would love this conversation and they are out in the streets tonight or they are otherwise occupied, I hope that you will share it with them so that they get to enjoy the magic that I know is going to happen. I have two amazing writers who write across genre, across age groups. They're both very versatile writers. And so I want to get straight into the chat. First, I want to introduce Bethany C. Morrow. Bethany is a recovering expat, recently returning from 6 years in Montreal, Quebec, to live and write in North Country, New York. A California native, Bethany graduated from the University of California, Santa Cruz with a BA in sociology. Following undergrad, she studied clinical psychology research at the University of Wales, Bangor, in Great Britain, before returning to North America to focus on her literary work. She is the author of the adult novel Mem, which is a Charis favorite. Many of our Charis customers love that book, so I hope some of those fans are on this call tonight. And the editor of the young adult anthology Take the Mic, Fictional Stories of Everyday Resistance. A Song Below Water is her debut standalone young adult novel. Yes, right there. So we're gonna make sure that folks are clicking to buy that. And Zoraida Córdova is the author of several fantasy series for teens, including the award-winning Brooklyn Bruges series and Incendiary. Her short fiction has appeared in several anthologies, including Toil and Trouble, 15 Tales of Women and Witchcraft. Her debut middle grade novel, which we are also celebrating tonight because it is brand new as well, is The Way to Rio Luna. She is the co-host of the podcast Deadline City with Donnell Clayton. Zoraida was born in Ecuador and raised in Queens, New York. When she isn't working on her next novel, she's planning a new adventure. So I'm really honored to have you both here. If folks have questions, you can start just popping them into the Ask a Question section down there. You can also, I see you're saying hi to one another in the chat. That's great. We love that. I'm going to go ahead and get out of the way, and we're going to start our wonderful conversation. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Excellent. Now it's just the two of us.
And I saw your seashell, by the way.
Yes. You Sally sells seashells.
I love it.
This is my favorite cup. It's full of seltzer, for anyone who's wondering. I keep drinking out of this because it makes me happy.
Yes.
I'm a child.
And also because it's really important to find things that make us happy right now.
Exactly. And I also wrote a mermaid series, so I always collect things like that. But I'm so excited that we get to do this, and I want you to be able to celebrate your book, A Song Below Water. I think that your writing is so beautiful and immersive. And you write about all the things that I love, but you're doing it in a way that I would have killed to read when I was a teenage girl in Queens, New York, searching for supernatural, paranormal, magic stories.
Yeah.
Right. So I want to start off talking about myth and belief. We both write fantasy, and we both write contemporary fantasy. There is a line in the book that I want to read I want everybody to listen to, which goes, it's talking about belief, right? I guess it depends on what movie or song or TV shaped which decade. It doesn't really matter what the world believes about you isn't a matter of life and death, and it isn't unless you're a siren. So let's talk about that.
So in this book, mythos is really interesting because it matters a lot, and then it also doesn't matter at all, right? Because you have the Aloco, which are the top of the food chain, and they are they're the most beloved supernatural people, and that myth in real life, that folklore comes from the Central African idea of Boloko, and it's a rather malevolent, sort of scary, very, very scary myth or whatever, because they are cannibals. They're constantly preying on people. They use these bell sounds to attract their prey, and then they eat them. But in the world of A Song Below Water, because anyone can be a loco, and because they're, over the years or whatever, they've become so popular, their mythos becomes very benign. It's treated like, of course, this is silly, this is ridiculous, nobody believes this, of course nobody believes mythos. And at the same time, you have the sirens, who are exclusively Black women, and their mythos, of course, is that their voice is manipulative and that it can be used to take control of someone else and force them to do your will. And because it's Black women, so this is what makes this contemporary fantasy. This is directly interacting with the real world as we know it, the present day world that we all live in. So because they are exclusively Black women, the mythos around their identity is treated like it's complete fact. It's treated like it's dangerous. And you see that happening in the book, where you have something that says, these people back in the day used to literally eat your flesh, and everybody's like, oh, that's silly.
But they keep their sweet little voices and these charms.
Exactly.
So how harmful can they be? And I love the way you do that, because this is not going to be super spoilery, but the difference is Tavia spends the whole book trying to keep her voice a secret, and she uses ASL to communicate when she literally feels like her voice is just going to burst out of her siren call.
Yeah.
But then the locos are all like, do you want to hear my song? Why don't you hear it? And they're like pushing it on people.
Right. And people are coming to them constantly wanting to hear it. Like it's something that they wear in a piece of jewelry. Not all of them wear it, but they all have it. They all carry this bell that their particular melody has been placed into. And it is completely charming to people. Everybody loves it. Everybody wants to hear it all of the time, even though the mythos it's connected to is that this was used to lure people to their very gruesome deaths. And it's just sort of, and I've said this before, it's really thinking about the way that the mythology about a certain people can easily change if they're the right people.
Right.
So for sirens, of course, it is a matter of life and death. People believing that you're a siren can be a matter of life and death. You are in actual danger around it. And you see that through the murder trial involving a woman named Rhoda Taylor, who has been killed when the book begins. And her live-in boyfriend is on trial for her murder. And his defense alleges that Rhoda was a siren. And that's really all you need. There's no way to check that. There's no way to verify whether she actually was. But the point is that if she was, then maybe she made him do it.
Right.
So it's something that is actually, you are actually in danger.
Yeah. And I love the way that you use those metaphors for real life, because we spend so much time, at least I spend so much time with the kind of fantasy that I read, or watched, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Annette Curtis Claus, if you read YA in the 90s, right? And these were all metaphors for the other, X-Men, a metaphor for civil rights and the other, except mutants are all mostly white people. Right. But here we can confront the actual activism that people are doing, and we can actually, you can make the girls Black sirens and cosplay mermaids and still have these messages. So do you want to talk about that and how that developed in your narrative?
So that just to me is literally the right and responsible way to do something. I and an author named L.L. McKinney have talked constantly together, and her, extensively on Twitter, about what we call allegorical or stand-in bigotry, where usually white authors will write a story that's supposedly going to bring to light some awful, some awful thing that's happening in the real world that we really want to confront. The problem is that to do it, they completely erase real world bigotry. They completely erase the victimization and the oppression and the marginalization of an actual people. And when you do that and you code white people as being the mutants, or you code white people as being the elves or whatever it is that are looked down upon, to me, it's horribly irresponsible. It's horribly lazy. It's horrible world building, because you're asking me to believe, first of all, that you can't understand what's happening to anyone. You can't have any sort of empathy for the real world. And what you need to do is to make it about yourself and center yourself. And that's the way that we're supposed to get the message about. But that doesn't make any sense, because at the end of the day, if I'm watching this show and you're coded white, I'm still getting the same sociological cues that you are the right person, or you're the power dominant person. So it's not really doing the work I think that they think it's doing in the first place. But the other problem with it is, of course, that it erases what I actually go through. It doesn't take any responsibility for who is benefiting from what's actually happening to me in the real world. And so sometimes you'll see an actual marginalized person cast in one of these shows or movies or something as the bad guy, because supposedly racism is over. So now we're going to focus on this sort of like orc bigotry or something. But that's horribly offensive, right? Because you're erasing my real world marginalization and you're casting me as the oppressor. Mm-hmm. But in real life, you've done nothing to change my lived experience. Like, that to me is like the height of just too muchery. I can't understand how people do this over and over and over again. And I'm not the first person to say, hey, that's crap. That's not how you do it. If you watch things like Black Lightning, you're talking about a show that completely takes into account your Blackness, completely takes into account how the world responds to your Blackness, and illuminates real world things like experimentation on Black people in the United States. It puts into focus, into hyper focus, something that historically has happened to us. It doesn't transfer it to somebody else to get you to think this is, because that would take away from the fact that this really happened. Right, this is absolutely really true. These people are now grappling with having superpowers and having their superpowers be assumed dangerous because they're also Black. Like, that is so much more complex. It's so much more complicated. It's so much more responsible. I think it actually allows people to focus on what is really happening in the real world instead of making it entirely fantastical. And then they can sort of walk away from that story and really never be confronted with the supposed lessons that were in it. So A Song Below Water is contemporary fantasy because it's set in the world that we actually live in. Right. And there's a layer of fantasy woven into our world. It's not taking its place. It's not a secret world or an urban fantasy where it's sort of an underground thing.
I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the difference between the urban, because I write urban fantasy, and not just because my stuff takes place in New York, right? It's
right.
It is a secret world layered on top of another world, but your sirens are out and about. Yes, right. They sort of, you have the siren trials, which I believe happened in the 60s.
Yes.
And so you code all of these things and you set a history for how sirens have been treated in contemporary American culture.
Right.
But you still get placed, you were telling me, in urban fantasy categories.
Yes. And I think that something, I think if anybody, I'm 37, so I think anybody in my age group will remember that in the 90s, urban was marketing for Black, sometimes also brown, but it was basically like, if you wanted to pitch something to Black teens, it was like the urban section. So I think that people literally think that's what urban means. So when this book was coming out, despite the fact that this happens in broad daylight in Portland, Oregon, there's no like underground world. There's no, you know what I mean? It's not a knowledge that a certain group of people are privy to. It's literally out in the open. Everybody on the planet knows that these fantastical creatures exist and they're part of the social hierarchy. But I think because of the cover and the two Black girls on it, people were like, urban fantasy. And I'm like, that's not what urban fantasy means.
See, and I always thought, and I'm so thankful that you clarified it for me, because for the longest time, I'm like, okay, contemporary just means it's happening now. And like urban that's why I never understood when some books that were called urban fantasy took place in like rural Massachusetts, and I'm like, but that's not urban.
Well, and that's the other thing is urban fantasy is always in a city, right? It depends on a city. Like I think definitively it depends on being in a city, and the sort of the metaphor of the unseen lives in a city. So I'm not sure how you would do urban fantasy in like Bumblescum someplace.
Suburban fantasy. Okay. New category.
Okay, we're not okay. Suburban fantasy.
Suburban fantasy.
Whole new, I love it.
New category.
Of course. There's a lot of Starbucks. There's a lot of Karen haircuts. I got it.
Yes. Okay. Oh my God. Karen Strong is here.
I know. Hi, Karen. And both of my sisters are here. Anastasia and Jennifer are my sisters, and I'm very excited to see them.
Okay. So let's go back to Portland, because other than Twilight, I don't really know a lot of books in the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
So, and like Oregon is a place, like it was founded by white supremacists. Mm-hmm. So how do you not reconcile is not the right word, but why?
Oh, I don't reconcile it. The reason that it's set in Portland is, okay, so Jen in the comment section is my sister who lives in Portland, Oregon. And she's been there. If my nephew is 13, oh my gosh, as of like yesterday, I'm morally opposed to it. But so if he's 13, then I think that she has to have lived there for 13 years or maybe 14 years. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I've spent a lot of time in Portland, Oregon, because my sister Jennifer lives there, and it is an experience. It is just it's a really interesting experience. Portland. Okay. So in the book, we talk about keep Portland weird. Yeah. And that's something that they are really serious about. I did not make that up. That's a tagline that you will see on different things in Portland. So they take a lot of pride in being, just like outside of the norm and being, hipsters. And part of, I think, their whole identity is how progressive the place is. And that is why, for sure, Heather Wiggins says Portland is totally an experience. And it's not that I don't like Portland. It's that I don't like being told someplace is a safe haven. I don't like someone else telling me that.
Right, because it's a safe haven for who?
Exactly. If you are telling me that, if you have to tell me, I clearly didn't pick that up myself. And since I'm a Black woman, that's not a good sign. So the issue is when I'm in Portland, I routinely hear people bragging on Portland. It's not horribly different from being in New York and people just not stopping talking about New York. So it's not the only place in the world that does this.
Yeah, I do have a lot of New York pride, but also a lot of New York anger.
Right. If you can balance it and be realistic, I have no problem with it. But I shouldn't hear, as I'm walking down the street in New York, hearing people talk about New York is kind of much. So that happens a lot in Portland. But the problem is that the identity is all based around, in my experience, how progressive they are, how liberal they are, how safe and amazing and weird and intentional this place is. And it doesn't match up with the lived experience of non-white people in Portland. It doesn't match up with the segregationist laws, of Portland. It doesn't match up with the white supremacist presence in Oregon. And so I get really upset when, as somebody who was born and raised on the West Coast, you have these places that take pride in something and it's a complete lie, because it makes it a very insidious kind of racism that I am exposed to, where I am constantly being scrutinized for whether I'm grateful enough. Nobody's asking me what it feels like. Nobody's asking me if what my experience actually is. They're telling me what my experience is, and then they're asking me why I'm not grateful for everything they've done for me. And that's a really problematic aspect of American liberalism to begin with. So it was really intentional for me that A Song Below Water be set in that place and amongst that culture. I also really I just want to give a lot of representation to West Coast Black kids, because we have a very particular upbringing. We have a very particular experience, and people have a lot of misconceptions about that because we think of racism as being like relative.
Right.
So
or in the South.
Exactly. So it's like, well, aren't you lucky that you're not in the South? Well, maybe if I was in the South, there would be more of me, first of all.
Right.
I would have community at the very least, right? I could have
Mhm.
whole Black, like, enclaves and places that really felt like they were mine. You don't get that as much on the West Coast. So I wanted to tell Black American kids, I know you exist. Because I'm one of you. I know that you exist on the West Coast. I know that you're going through stuff that's really specific to having grown up on the West Coast.
And I think you see that in Tavia's experience from moving from California to Portland.
Yeah.
Sort of the jarring situation there.
Yeah.
We're gonna...
I was, but then I was like, I don't think I can say what I was about to say.
No worries. No worries. We'll continue. I have more questions.
Yeah.
So for you, what were some of the formative consumption of media that got you into sci-fi fantasy? Because if you're on the internet right now at all, you get to see how the statistics of who's getting published. Not who's writing, because people are writing.
Exactly.
It's just who's getting published in science fiction and fantasy, specifically in YA, and what those numbers look like.
Yeah.
Right.
I think when I was growing up, I am a person who, for all of my, excessive, Latrice is here,
Yay!
for all of my, really serious education, I love TV and movies, and I will constantly inform people, like when they talk about like, oh, I don't watch television, in sort of an elitist way. I'm always like, well, then you're sort of missing out on some of the best writing that's going on. Please remember that these things are written as well. Okay, it's not improv. So I grew up watching. I think my consumption of Star Trek was pretty severe. My family was pretty obsessed with The Next Generation and then Voyager. We watched Deep Space Nine, but definitely I do not have a memory of it being as obsessive as Voyager, and Voyager was my favorite. And Guinan, of course, was on Star Trek, which was
Were you a
The
Star
Next
Wars
Generation.
person at all? Are you like Star Wars versus Star Trek? I don't know what your feelings are.
So my feelings, and she's asking me this writing a Star Wars, as someone who has like clearly picked a side. This feels like a very Danielle thing for you to do to me right now. She would be very proud. So I feel that Star Wars is fantasy and Star Trek is science fiction. So it's very, very distinct to me. It's basically like a Western that happens in space.
Yes, it's a space. I don't even think we can call it a space opera.
We can't.
Sure.
All of the information that I ever saw that would even go towards space opera is when they talk about the Millennium Falcon. Like, I don't know of any other really like, and that conversation is not very deep. That conversation.
No, it's like, pass me the flux capacitor so I can fix the hydro, whatever.
Yeah.
But that's what I like. That's the kind of science fiction that I like, which is not science fantasy.
I say sci fantasy, right? I think it's definitely sci fantasy. So I remember, and the thing that I did like about it, I liked the Ewoks, which apparently is not what you're supposed to like.
Actually, our generation, I'm 33. Our generation loves Ewoks.
I loved. Okay, and also what was Drew Barrymore's movie with the Ewoks? Where her parents and her brother like die at the beginning or whatever. What was that?
What?
Oh my gosh. I gotta remember what
Drew
these things
Barrymore?
were. Yeah, as a really young child.
He was in a Star Wars?
Wasn't this like a special or something?
Christmas special?
Was it I don't remember what special it was, but they used to come out with Ewoks forever. Yes. Not E.T. No, it's like she's wearing this bracelet. Something look I'm not dealing with you guys right now. The Battle for Endor, is that what it was?
Oh, okay. Yeah. The Battle for Endor.
I'm just like, that was if you want to talk about one that I watched over and over and over again, I loved that. And it's not that I didn't like Star Wars. I just remember thinking like, yes, I took it way back. I remember watching it and being like, I don't think this is a very good story. I just didn't. I really didn't. Emotionally, I got into the second one at the time, which is now the fifth one.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. But anyway, I mean, Harrison Ford's in it. I will live. I'll survive. Right. But yeah, you guys are much deeper in that camp. It was Star Trek for me. It was Guinan. And especially having Guinan be who she was on Next Generation, and just her wisdom and then I think Alfred Woodard, which one was she in the Star Trek movies? Not First Contact. Was it First Contact? Anyway.
You might like take away my friend card and be like, sorry, I don't want to talk to you. My first Star Trek was the first movie, the J.J. Abrams movie with Chris Pine. That's the first Star Trek I watched. And then my friends went
Latrice said, get out. Get out.
I'm fired.
You're fired. Effective immediately. What just happened? No!
And then one of my friends was like, I went to visit her in California, and she showed me the Tribble episode. And then we watched a couple of episodes, and I was like, okay, I get it.
There are so many Next Generation movies because they were fire, because they were amazing. And then Geordie LaForge, like, come on, you guys. Like, Star Trek that's my heart. I love it. So I watched a lot of that. When I was reading a lot of things that now I don't even know where we would put them in the bookstore. And I've talked about this so freaking much, but like Lois Duncan, Christopher Pike, all of the Eternal Enemy, and don't forget the Midnight such and such. And they were books that like defied categorization because they had the most random elements in them.
Yeah. I remember reading a Christopher Pike book and going obsessed. And like, there was a girl and she had memory loss. Yes. And then she was being followed, but then it was like before I Know What You Did Last Summer too.
Yes.
Because it was like she ran over some random guy and then he was haunting her.
Those trying to explain to people what a Christopher Pike book was about. It'd be like, okay, so this girl is watching this movie. Somebody sends her this movie on a VHS and she's watching this movie, and then all this stuff starts happening where she's like losing her memory or starts having flashbacks, and then she's having nightmares and whatever, and then she digs into her arm, and then once she gets past a certain period of blood, then suddenly there's wires, and then it turns out that she's actually a robot, and also like the person who was giving to her is like her grandfather or her grandson. I can't remember which way the time loop went, but it was like nonsense. It was I know, guys.
No, I totally understand. This is what,
but I loved it. When
people say that young adult is too violent or too dark or too whatever, I'm like, you did not read young adult.
You did not read in the 90s. If your best friend survived, it was a dream. It was a dream sequence. And she's dead.
And it's nice. There were these books by like Carolyn something, like Mahoney or something. They were like super sweet. And I was like, if nice things are happening to you in YA, then you're either reading that or you're reading Nancy Drew. Right?
You're reading that, Nancy Drew, or what was it? Which I never read because there were no Black people in it. Sweet Valley High or something.
Sweet Valley High,
yeah. I've always been a very dark child. So I was not interested in any of that stuff. I wanted the random plot twists. I wanted, the horror out of nowhere. I
wanted like the Silver Kiss by Annette Curtis Claus. I just wanted like a vampire to like find me and
did you ever read? So Christopher Pike is my first introduction to vampires. He had a vampire trilogy that I believe they re-released some years later with totally different covers and everything. But these things came out when I was like in 6th grade or something, and it was absolutely above my age group, but that didn't stop me.
No, because
at all.
I was like, I wanted to be like a mall goth because that's all I knew, right? And I just wanted, I wanted the Silver Raven Wolf witch books and all of these things. So that was all very exciting for me.
Yeah, no, and that's what I wanted, to YA has sort of become like really specific camps for different genres. Like if you write, paranormal romance, then it needs to be like Twilight. And if you write such and such, then it needs to be like, and it feels like it's gotten so restrictive. And when I remember the books that I was reading, they were all over the place. And so I wanted to write something where unexpected things could happen and just sort of fluidly. And I feel like contemporary fantasy like allowed me to sort of reconnect with the kind of bonkers young adult that I read, where I could just, where I could put sprites and they're completely.
Do you remember Francesca Leah Block?
No.
Oh, okay. She wrote those the Weetzie Bat books. They were like these fairies in California. It was weird. No. It was so weird.
You have to give me a book list if you have stuff that matches that.
90s YA was just bananas.
It was bananas.
So I want to ask an audience question before I get back to all of my other questions. And somebody asked, I don't know if you have names on here, but somebody asked, what was your debut experience been like? What inspiration and/or advice would you give to an aspiring Black writer? But this is not your debut. This is your YA debut.
Right. So this is my YA debut. My adult market novel, Mem, came out in 2018. And so it's difficult for me because I'm just one person. It's difficult for me to consider this my debut because I already did a debut. But this is definitely a very YA versus, it's not just versus adult because my adult was also literary and it was speculative literary, but it's a literary press. And it's just a very different experience. YA is very like, bonkers. And YA is very like explosive and exciting constantly. And so it is a 100% different experience. And it's a lot busier, even without having to travel like I did last time. There's just a lot. There's a lot of engagement. There's a lot of interaction, which is really, really amazing. And I love it. I would say if I were to give, an aspiring Black writer any advice, it would be mostly to decide or try to decide if you can, whether you feel like you want to go the traditional route or whether you're interested in indie or whether, and this is separate, whether you're interested in self-publishing, because I hate for people to sort of land somewhere because they get discouraged or something versus having made a decision that this is like actually what I think is best for my work and for myself and the level of control I want to have, because there are reasons to do any of those different things. And having done both indie and traditional, for me, it's a matter of what the story is and what's the best home and what's the best place in the market for that particular story. But understanding how difficult it is for a non-white writer, but specifically as a Black writer, and specifically as a Black woman writer, I would say very early on, find a network, like find your people, get into community, because you're gonna need it. You're absolutely gonna need it. And Twitter is an easy place to do that. We are constantly talking. Like if you follow me, today is supposed to have been a light day. Today was the day that I was like, I have an event tonight, so I'm not going to talk too much trash on Twitter today. And that did not go to plan. So yeah. And my friend, yeah, thank you, Charis and Karen, for laughing at that. I really was trying today. Today was supposed to be a good girl day. That did not work.
No, yeah. I think that what people are look at YA and there are a lot of opinions about what's what, but I also think that we need to have really good advocates for writers.
Right. Yeah.
And what I notice for Latinx writers that I have given mentorships to, I think that a lot of people are just so enamored with the glamour of writing that people just want to get published. And having no publishing deal is better than a bad publishing deal, and having no agent is better than having a bad agent.
Absolutely. So, and that's why it's so important to get into communities so that you can have people to bounce ideas off of and get wisdom about these decisions that you're going to be making, to make sure that you're not falling into any traps that somebody who's been around a little longer would know. But I also want to say, if you're not listening to Deadline City, it is a podcast that I think that you should be listening to. Danielle and Zoraida have a lot of experience in the industry, and it's just I think it's a good starting place if you want to start understanding what the industry is about. I don't know what category or genre the asker is writing for, but I don't necessarily think that will matter in terms of that advice. I think that you should start listening to people of color who are already in the industry.
Yeah, and our first season is all about the mechanics of publishing.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about a really serious question. Let's talk about gargoyles.
Yes, let's do that. This is where we get into the meat.
This is the bookmark that I was using while I was reading A Song Below Water. I just want everybody to understand this. I got this in the Kansas City Comic-Con. I don't even know who the artist is right here, but
I want people to understand that I guess I was not adequately prepared for the amount of the feedback I get to be just about Gargi.
Yes.
Which
Tell
is the nickname for
who he is.
Yes. So at the beginning of the book, you find out that Tavia's house is being used as a roost for a gargoyle, and he has been perched on top of the Phillips house for 3 years at the start of the story. And so it feels like now we're trying to get Danielle involved. It's because she does not have the same love. She does not have the same love for...
hates on gargoyles, and that is not allowed.
And it's not allowed. They're so
I
sexy.
think it's because she doesn't understand why they're in stone formation. She's like, they're singing creatures in a movie, and I'm like, that's because you've only seen The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Which,
you've never
not to say that movie did not give me life when I was younger, but it really had nothing to do with the gargoyles in that one. No, they are, so the mythos in my book, they are carved from stone. They're chiseled from stone. There's no such thing as like a born gargoyle or something. So their natural form will absolutely be in stone, and they have to be carved by someone. And I mean, listen, if you are into romance novels where they talk about how this guy looks like he could be chiseled out of stone, wouldn't you just want somebody who legit is
literally chiseled out of stone?
Like literally chiseled out of stone. So and of course the girls are, at first you don't realize, I think, that Tavia is terrified of him because they are so accustomed to him being on the roof.
Right,
he's been on the roof for 3 years.
Yeah.
He's been on the roof for 3 years, but as they get closer and closer to him throughout the story, then you realize, okay, it is very different to stand directly next to this gargoyle than to like see him up on the spire. Yes, Goliath. So
exactly.
We are also of the age group where there was a cartoon called Gargoyles. And even if you didn't watch it, I have no memory of watching a full episode, but it was everywhere.
Me neither. I remember sitting there eating my Dunkaroos and my Capri Sun, and like watching all of this. And also, I think that I've been waiting for, I don't know if you're gonna do gargoyle romance like straight, like completely only gargoyle romance, but I've been waiting for this because there's periods of time where magical creatures in young adult literature get recycled, right? For 2 years, mermaids. For 10 years, vampires. For werewolves and people and dragons and all this stuff. And there was only like 1 or 2 series with gargoyles in it, and they like. Can you do it, please?
My thing is, like, I genuinely, when I wrote this book, I was like, this is a standalone, period. And then, because I really have never written the same thing twice, or even like the same genre directly after. So it was a 2-book deal. And I was like, well, I don't know what you guys are going to get because I don't really do this. And then even at an editorial level, people's reaction to one of the characters in the book really like lit a fire under me. And I was like, no, I'm not having this. I'm telling this person's story. And I won't tell you who the next book is about. It's not a sequel, but it's set in the same world. It has to do with the same people. And well, not all the same people, but it's not Gargi.
Come on, bro.
I know, but here's the thing. I was not prepared. I was not prepared for the reaction to Gargi.
You should do a Tor.com novella.
Right? So I was like, now I'm thinking about him a lot because people are constantly talking about him to me. And I'm like,
your sleeper hit. He just like froze out of nowhere.
And I was like, I get it. I feel like you're making some points. Some points are being made.
With his beautiful wingspan, no pun intended.
Yes. And also so one of my favorite scenes, actually a couple of my favorite scenes involve him. So there's a scene where I won't set it up and spoil it, but there's a scene where he has just sort of snatched the girls up, which, I mean, how much do we just love that image anyway? He just snatched the girls to safety. And he takes them like pretty much to like the middle of this vast nature reserve until, I don't know, the heat, is off. And Tavia makes him like come down so that they can sit on his back so that they're not in the dirt or whatever. And yes, that scene, Latrice. And they sit on his back, they lay across his huge back and just like have girl talk while he just like softly breathes beneath them and stuff. And I'm like, okay, this is legit one of my favorite scenes in the book.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I know that Danielle doesn't like things like that, but I, of the Deadline City delegation, approve. This rolls into a question that somebody asked. Is there a fantasy or a mythological creature you want to write that you haven't yet?
I don't think so, but that doesn't mean anything because tomorrow that might change. I will say that I've said this before, my issue a lot of times with why I don't read as much as I feel like my interest level would like is because usually when we write fantastical creatures, we inevitably give them a human obsession. And I never understand that. And it feels like such bad characterization.
What do you mean? Like they're obsessed with protecting humans? Or
they're obsessed with humans. It's like the human gaze is paramount. So like if you have a mermaid, as soon as she comes to age, she's obsessed with the boy on land.
Right. Like part of your world.
Listen, and it's of course, and Little Mermaid, she's obsessed. She has this vast world underwater. She swims, which is like flying, but she's obsessed with life on land, which is finite. It's like so.
Do you know why? It's because flipping those fins won't get her too far. Okay.
Wow. No, I feel like it's because humans are writing it, right? So I feel like the problem is that people are not it's my whole problem with like Jurassic Park, where it's like, okay, we made these dinosaurs that need to eat. If you guys are going to start just quoting the song in the comments.
Yes, full sing along.
No, stop. So anyway, with like Jurassic Park, it's like, okay, we brought these dinosaurs back to life, and every time they see a human they want to chase us and eat us. Oh my gosh, Zoraida, I saw that. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so my issue is, why do we do that? Like, why do we make these amazing imaginative creatures? My sister is disowned, just so everybody knows. Jennifer, it's over between us. So I want to make stuff where they're they are literally a part of our world. Are you satisfied? You got me to say a part of this?
Success.
Or I want to make it where they either have a really good reason for this, or there's a human maybe obsessed with them, because that would make more sense. I'm just tired of like vampires who are just fixated on a human girl, or,
I think it's because so much of paranormal mythology and these creatures is obsessing. What does it mean to be human, right?
That is so annoying, especially when they are things that like had a human life, especially depending on the vampire lore. A lot of times they had a human life. So like, why are you sitting here dealing with people who are going to be dead in like 50 years? Like, go live in your own society and do your
thing. That. Do gargoyles in a gargoyle world. Like Barbie girl in a Barbie world. Like gargoyle in a gargoyle world.
I'm going to bring everything back to 90s music.
Yeah.
No, and that's what I think. Like, if you know where Gargi came from, then yeah, I don't know if I have a book about it, a story that constitutes a book about it, but I feel like I could at least do a
I'm gonna talk to your tour editor.
She's like, it's happening.
Miriam,
like it or not.
We're doing it. Tour.com. Yeah. We're pitching it right now.
Maybe I could see doing that, because that is a whole different world. I'm not going to say a whole new world, you guys. We're done with that.
Awesome. Okay, so I have another question. What do you want people on the outside looking in to take away from witnessing it in a song Below Water?
So I think we a lot of times talk about the need for representation, which is 100% true and should really go without saying. But I feel like from a sociological perspective, the part that we don't really talk about enough is the need for the power dominant. So the need for anybody who is in a position of privilege to be decentered. There is a huge need for that. And I'm literally talking about for their own mental health, for their own cognition, for their own like developing empathy, I feel like what we don't talk about enough is the destructive and sort of infantilizing properties of privilege, because you will see grown men throw fits and tantrums over girls walking around passing out Black Lives Matters posters. When you see just such an infantile reaction to not being the center of attention, I really want to call people's attention to it, because I'm not saying infantilize as like hyperbole. I literally mean, are you trying to get my attention?
No, yeah. Sorry, I just realized that I missed the beginning part of that question, which is, what does Black sisterhood mean to you? I'm sorry, Elle. Okay. My bad.
Yeah, I will answer that.
I thought there were two different brackets.
But I feel like that is really important to me, though, is making sure that we are demonstrating to the power majority and to white Americans, you are being done a disservice by this erasure as well as we are, because we know who we are. We know what our gifts are. We know what our value is. We know what our power is. And you are, what did Zora Neale Hurston say? You're denying yourself the pleasure of my company. And I don't understand what could be wrong with you that you would do that. It doesn't, upset me at all, but like, you are really suffering and you don't even know it. You have a very infantile, like, necessity of being the center of attention, to the point that you literally cannot understand the world otherwise. And that is really destructive. That's really, really ridiculous. So in terms of what I hope people understand about Black sisterhood, I just really feel like people should have to sit and bask in it. I don't, whether you understand it or not, like,
right.
It's life-giving, it's life-changing. It's, I couldn't have done this week without multiple, different little sets of Black women that I rely on and depend on, who, first of all, there's something to be said about actual communication. A lot of times, if we speak the same language, people don't understand how many different dialects are going on at a time. And when I speak, the home feeling, the utter relaxation that I experience when I'm talking to Black women, particularly Black American women who share my experience, who share my context, I don't have to explain. There is a level of effort that is constantly happening for non-white people in this country, because you're constantly having to explain things that for you are second nature. You're constantly having to do extra work on top of whatever you're trying to communicate, and not having to do that in your group and your network between Tavia and Effie that's what home is. Like, that's what rest is. That's what revitalization is. It's being with the other parts of yourself, the other
Yeah.
people who understand you on a level that comes from sharing a lived experience. It just gives you rest like nothing else. So I want people to understand that they have seen very few sides of what it is to be, specifically in this book, Black American. They know very, very little about what it means to be Black American. They've really gorged themselves on images of pain and trauma and have really decided for themselves that that is what it is. And I guess in some ways I could understand you wanting to do that, because then you don't have to reckon with everything that you're missing out on and everything that you're being left out of. And this is something where I want to celebrate Black girls in public.
Right.
I want to demonstrate to people, like, this is who they are and this is what they're a part of. Whatever you think you're withholding from them, you have no idea what they actually have. And I think it's really important. I think it's really important to praise people in public.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's something that you do really beautifully here is you also talk about found family, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're not blood sisters. And in the very beginning, Tavia puts a distinction on that, like that it doesn't matter, right? And so how did you build their relationship knowing that they were separate from the beginning, right? Like Effie moved in with them because of circumstances. Mm-hmm. And then you unravel this mystery as to why she is the way she is and why she has the afflictions that she does.
The found family aspect to me is just regular life. And I think it's just regular life to most Black Americans, if not all Black Americans. And I've said this before as well. When you come from a demographic specific to this country that has had their biological ties intentionally severed, that was one of the points of how enslavement worked, was to intentionally deconstruct any sort of family unit, because we know what family means. We know how powerful family is in terms of autonomy and self-worth and all that kind of stuff. So we didn't always have the privilege of knowing who our biological family was. And even after the fact, didn't always have the privilege of finding and reconciling and reconnecting with our biological family. So I don't know any Black person who doesn't have cousins and aunties and uncles and stuff who are not biologically related to them. My own mom is not my biological mom. And that's just completely normal. And at the same time, I also have had cousins who are, literal cousins come and live with us for periods of time. Like, that also is just a normal part of the Black community. So having her move in, because of the way I think that our community and our culture does family, there's no like transition period, right?
No, right. And there's no like straight up.
Yeah, there's no like, okay, now we get to this threshold, now we're family. It's like you're here, you're home, this is family. And so and what I did was make it where, and this is the part that's not true to our world, I made it where everyone in the book sees it that way. Mm-hmm. So there's nobody in the world that keeps reminding them they're not sisters. There's nobody in the book that tells them, well, she's actually not, nobody questions who they are to each other, because why would I write that in there?
Yeah, and I think that's something that you see in a lot of other TV shows where they're like, oh, well, it's like a plot point used to separate people.
Yes.
And then I'm like, then why
do it in the first
that
place?
Bond in the first place?
Right. If you watched the first season of The Flash, the most important part of that show, and the reason I and my sister kept watching that show, Jennifer, you already know what I'm saying. Joe and Barry's relationship was the whole point for me. That is all. Oh, Andy's here. Hi, Andy. That gave me so much life. And when people started like making fan videos of that relationship, I'm like, thank you. That is so beautiful. It's what we want. And then, like you said, there are points where they would make it a plot point that they're not.
Like, well, you're not my dad.
And it's like, you would never do that.
I'm sorry. Barry Allen wouldn't do that. Sorry.
Exactly. I'm like, that is something that you guys forced him to do, because we don't do that. That is not how that works. This is family because this is family. You don't ever question it. You don't ever make the person feel like it's something that can be rescinded. Like, It just is. And I wanted to create a world where that is just fact. That's it.
Awesome. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left. So if you want to get your questions in, you can do the ask box, or you can just put them in there. Yeah, I think so, right? It's almost 8:30. I don't know. I
thought we were going to 9. Are we not going to 9?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't know. Never mind. Nobody told me what time.
Okay, but I might be just making that up, so we should ask someone. But yes, do keep. We have to 9. Okay.
Perfect. Because I feel like all of these, the last couple of days have been sort of melting into each other.
Oh my goodness. Time is it's a construct. It
exactly.
means nothing.
All right. So we've done like our Little Mermaid sing along and all of these things.
I can't believe you guys. I'm still mad at you guys for that.
So Sarah asked, were there any mythological elements you wanted to include but didn't make it in, right? Because you're restructuring what a siren was. You were removing this image of a naked girl on a rock singing to Odysseus.
No.
To come and break their ships down.
No.
How did you, like, you made it your own, and you've already talked about that, but.
No, so I didn't have any aspects of any of the mythology that got taken out because I didn't bring anything in avian respect, really. I didn't bring anything into it from other people's mythology. So when I started with sirens, it began and ended with the fact that these are women with power in their voice, and they are exclusively Black women.
And talk about the difference between compulsion and what was the other one?
Appeal and compel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the two siren calls that at the beginning of the book are appeal and compel. Compel is, I think, the one that we would most often think of, which is where you literally tell someone to do something. You compel someone to do something. And then appeal is where it doesn't have anything to do with what you say. It's the fact that you use the call over your voice, and it really transforms how you appear to the person you're speaking to. So it doesn't compel them to do anything. I think it more compels them to see you a certain way.
Okay.
However they want to see you, though. It doesn't really, you don't control necessarily, I want you to see me this way. It's more however you would prefer to see me, that would be beneficial to me. That's the way you're going to see me. Mm-hmm. And I don't put too fine a description or a definition on that because I didn't want to trap myself. And I also sort of want you to let your imagination run wild. When and where and how would you use this? She talks about, because she has an ex-boyfriend who is an Oloco, and she talks about the fact, and that in itself is like a huge deal that she even briefly dated.
Even her dad was like, that'll look good for you.
That'll be good for you. And that will definitely be, because in Portland specifically, a loco are, like I said, the top of the food chain. And they have so much goodwill. I think of it kind of as white proximity. Because I think of a loco power as basically being white privilege. Mm-hmm. So it's literally people believing that the closer I am to an Oloco, the better my life will be, the better I will be treated. And so her father is really excited when she starts dating this Oloco boy. Okay, what were we talking about? What were we saying?
We're talking about the aspects of the mythology that you kept.
Yeah, so there's all of that stuff. But
you made it up. You made it up on your own.
She was going to use appeal, though. So she was thinking after they broke up, basically, that if she had used appeal on him, then she would have known what he wanted her to be like to not break up with her, basically.
Right. But I think it's important that you don't use their siren call as sort of a fix for everything, because that's not how the real world works. And if you're writing contemporary fantasy,
and the point is that
problems.
There's the risk of using it, period. Mm-hmm. So even if it could fix things, the fact that you can do this and the fact that you're a Black woman who can do this is dangerous. The point is, she never used her call around him. Even when he broke up with her, even when everything went south and she was so devastated, she knows, even though she has this power, she cannot use it. She's just sort of lamenting, what if, but of course it can never happen. So and then of course there's one of the main plot points is that there's this new siren call that she doesn't so much learn as just abruptly starts manifesting, and it's what is actually getting her into trouble.
Yeah.
But in terms of all of the other stuff like Oloco, they have, like I said, a really maleficent, is that the word I want? But they have just a really sort of negative connotation and a negative folklore, and I completely sort of malicious, really sort of abandoned that, and I made them what I wanted them to be. And that again was also for the purpose of the telephone effect of making it specifically diaspora fantasy, where it's not African fantasy. It's literally me as a Black American who has been divorced from whatever my origin would be, my national origin would be on the continent, have sort of heard tell of something. And so what you see is sort of what you have heard tell of. It's not accurate necessarily. It's not true to its original form. It's sort of what happens after a copy of a, after hearing something from someone who heard something from someone who heard something. And then we do refer, you do find out about actual mermaids in the book, because Effie is a cosplay. At first, the belief is that she's a cosplay mermaid. And mermaids, basically at puberty is when you would get your tail, and once you get your tail, you go out to sea, and the rest of your life, they have basically two separate parts of their life, is on land and then after puberty in the ocean. But they tend to spawn below the equator. So there's no Norwegian or whatever you were saying before, like the Viking.
I was like the Viking mermaids. What about the Viking mermaids? Like
I specifically took stuff and made it where, because it's like the world that we live in, not everybody gets to do everything we want. And I know, because I wanted to be a goth in high school, and people had a really hard time with that and didn't want me to be. So in my world, it's the same way. You can't get everything you want.
In my defense, when I wanted to be a goth in high school, the person who had the most problem with it was probably my grandmother. When I went to Ecuador with like my Sharpied Converse and my sweaters with 1,700 safety pins on them, she threw them out. And she said someone stole them.
You know what's really cool? My dad was a single dad for like all of my high school years, and he just sort of had to go with stuff. So I distinctly remember the day that we were in the car and he started singing along with Nine Inch Nails. Like that.
Nice. Also, wait, did you like Brooklyn Nine-Nine? Because you use noise a lot, and every time I heard it in Jake Peralta's voice.
Okay, so I stopped watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but I loved it. But I do that because I'm from California, and the voice, and it was actually literally the most annoying thing ever. But then it's just part of my psyche, so I can't.
Part of your right, yeah. No, I can think of the New Yorkisms as well. Yeah. One of the beautiful things that you do in this book is Tavia's trying to hear her grandmother in water, right? Yeah. The mythology that sirens, your voice goes back to the sea, and so there are moments like that are really sad, but poignant and beautiful, where she's trying to hear her grandmother in a faucet or in a chlorine pool, and she's like, "Well, my grandmother's not going to be here." And there's that distance of what you lose when you are a generation removed. Yeah. So you're talking about the things that we lose along the way, right? Mm-hmm. And so do you want to elaborate on that, or how that was important to you to include in the novel, or as part of Tavia's characterization as her siren heritage?
It really speaks to her siren heritage specifically because the reason she's disconnected from her grandmother is because her father thought it would be safer, because of how I think what you can sort of infer from it is that the grandmother was living more openly as a siren, and the father, knowing how dangerous it is to be a siren, was not willing to have his daughter live that way, didn't want her to see that. Because if you are a siren, part of the reality of being a siren in this world also is it's matrilineal. And therefore, if somebody has, so the grandmother had a son, so you know that obviously he's not a siren, but if he has a daughter, she will 100% be a siren. There's no getting around that. So he has a daughter, of course, and he moves to California to get away from the network and the grandmother who's living in Portland, because she's living more out in the open, and he, sees that is unsafe. So what she's going through, and the pain and isolation that's compounded for her, is because of respectability politics. It's because of the way that we can sometimes respond in our own communities, where we can try to take control. We can take ownership of the evil that's being done to us, because we feel like it's the only way to try at all to mitigate what we're going through, or the danger or anything. And if you are completely out of control, there's nothing you can do. That's a very hopeless feeling. Mm-hmm. And to try to undo that, you wrongly start taking responsibility for your own treatment, for your own oppression, and you start criticizing your own behavior and policing your own behavior as though you somehow have the power to undo white supremacy. So because of respectability politics, because of her father wanting her to really eschew everything about being a siren, he really makes her life harder. He makes her life a lot more difficult, and he makes understanding herself much more difficult, because she doesn't have this grandmother who could have told her, given her some sort of advice, given her some sort of guidance. And so she begins, when she starts looking for her grandmother, she's actually looking for her grandmother to find out if it's possible to get rid of the voice altogether.
Right.
So that's the original point, is she just wants her to tell her that she can be normal, basically.
Yeah. Miriam asks, hold on, I just saw it. Okay, so I can't believe I missed talking about Gargs, but aside from that, and the Flash, talk to us about your favorite and best and most interesting pop culture examples of found family, while we're on the topic of her grandmother.
So, favorite found family, I mean, I really loved the first season of The Flash. That really just did it for me so much. I really love daddies. I am a daddy's girl.
I thought you meant like you love daddies the way that I loved, and I'm just kidding. I'm not.
Okay, but that's also true. But anyway, that's not what I was talking about, Z. Thank you so much. Danielle, you don't have to be in the comments telling people that you don't like Gargi, please.
Yeah,
please
no gargoyle hatred here.
No gargoyle slander.
Gargoyle save. I'm just gonna put this up again just for
Danielle. Yes, you have to see it. Look at that. Yes. No, so my favorite found family, absolutely, I love that. I love Jake Peralta and Captain Holt.
That's right.
I love that
he's always like, I'm sorry, Dad. I mean Captain. I mean Dad.
But I love that he ends on Dad. That's my favorite. It's like he corrects himself and then he says, "Oh no, I was right the first time." Mm-hmm. I really love seeing. I think that dynamic of guys finding a father figure and actually leaning into it, because I think it also goes against toxic masculinity a lot, and the needs that we claim that cisgender men are not supposed to have, though they clearly do. So if you want to immediately get me sucked into something emotionally, listen, when Joe gave Barry his watch, Jennifer, I'm trying to keep it together right now. I find that I emotionally respond a lot to that. But by the same token, Michael Burnham and her connection to multiple, so I'm talking about Discovery, Star Trek Discovery. I don't know if you watched that because it's not Star Wars.
Right, and it's not Chris Pine, so I'm sorry. I'm garbage. I'm like little garbage. So.
No, so Michael Burnham has all found family in Discovery, because she is Spock's adopted older sister, and so she Spock has a human mother and a Vulcan father, and so Michael Burnham is also a human child growing up on Vulcan, and so she has this connection with both of his parents, and that in itself is a found family. But then when she joins the academy, and like when she becomes, I don't know if she starts off as an officer. I know she's a scientist on the ship. I don't remember what her actual like standing is, but every captain that she gets over the course of 2 seasons of Discovery glom onto her and like create a familial bond, to the point that there's even some like jealousy and competitiveness between the different parental figures. I love found family with parental figures. I really just do. Just anywhere you find them, I love it.
I agree with
Lieutenant, Heather said.
So I have a question from Ryan.
Okay.
If Bethany's characters met others, Zoraida's characters, what would they do, and what would they think of the other one? Would they hang out? I don't know. So I have pretty my witches, my brujas.
That's what I want to know about the brujas.
I think that the brujas, like, I definitely think they could hang in Portland. They might actually go there and just be like, "What's happening?
This is too weird. I don't like this brand of weird."
Because in my version of Brooklyn and Coney Island, where magic is a part of it, I have these supernatural societies. So there's an alliance, and then there's the hunters, who are like the police of the magical world, and everyone hates them because they kill magical creatures. And so my girls would probably show up to Portland and want to know everything about this, like the power of the siren.
Right. I feel like though they would, again, and I think again this speaks to like what it is like on the West Coast and specifically in the Pacific Northwest. I feel like they would have at first believed the same sort of hype that everyone believes, which is that this is safe. Like, this place is safe. Be
like, oh my God, this is like Brooklyn, but with it's just like Williamsburg. This is just Williamsburg. It's handlebar mustaches and IPA.
Listen, I always have to tell this story because my absolute favorite moment of just having very nearly lost it in Portland is crossing the street on the way to the bookstore. Jennifer, tell me you remember this guy. He had a handlebar mustache, and he had like razor to the scalp sort of fade, and then of course like a coif, and then he was wearing suspenders and jeans, and they were high waters, and he had on striped socks and then these boots or whatever. She said, "You're describing every guy here." Okay. The problem is that when he was walking across the street, this guy with these handlebar mustache and everything, that he just looked like he was a prospector. Okay. The look on his face, the smug satisfaction of his look, like he was just walking around satisfied with what he had done that day, and he was like literally walking across the street like, and I almost lost it. Like, I seriously,
can you do that face again?
As he's walking across the street though, and I was like you are so proud of yourself, and I was like, Jennifer, if you don't get me out of here, I'm going to cut him. Like, it's the self-satisfaction. I just can't. But I feel like when they would go there, there's no necessarily like active outward danger for most people or most beings in Portland.
Right.
And therefore you can believe for a period of time that this is a really cool, quirky, safe place until you're there long enough, I think.
Right. I think that the reason Elle was asking about if our mermaids would get along, like my mermaids and your sirens, is because I spend a lot of time thinking about the anatomy of the mermaid and how that looks like with transformation, because I'm really fascinated with supernatural creatures and cryptids and cryptozoology.
And
right?
And probably mating, I'm going to assume. Yeah,
exactly. So I just want to know if you thought about that when you were creating Gargi, and because you use very specific creatures. You have sirens, and sprites and gargoyles, but what about everybody else?
So the thing is that there are certain of these fantastical creatures that will spawn amongst humans, basically. So you're going along in your family and you are outwardly, because they are humanoids, except for a certain number of them. So a gargoyle is not going to show up in a family, because gargoyles, like I said, in this world, they have to be chiseled. Right. They have to be chiseled out of stone. So they don't procreate, or I don't know, I guess we'll see. But they don't You
can't do that. You can't tease that.
So they don't need to procreate.
I feel like you have to do it just to spite Danielle Clayton.
Just because she doesn't want me to. So with sirens, with mermaids, with giants, with any of the things, because there are some things that are spoken of in the book that really are no longer around as well.
Why did you choose those? Like, why, like, specific? I mean, I know it's like, obviously you're the writer, you can do whatever you want, but like, why did you choose specifically certain things? Is it like they just work in this world, or
no? They were things that I just wanted in there. Like, okay, so the ones that are not humanoid, like the ones that have no human form, are sprites, and I wanted sprites in there because they are chaos demons. I wanted some aspect, and I wanted some levity to the world also. I wanted something that really had no explanation and just like no purpose, and they're nowhere really in the hierarchy. Because they are their own complete thing. They clearly are, like, you're able to interact with them in our world, but you can't like catch them. You can't interact with them on a daily basis.
You're not going to Tinkerbell this.
No, they're doing their own thing, and then they're playing with you when they feel like playing with you. Like, that's the whole thing about sprites. So all the different ones, and a loco I brought in because I knew that I knew there was a hierarchy, because I knew that sirens were hated. If you have a whole group that is disliked, that means that there is somebody who is like, they have to be above or below something, right? So I knew that whoever I was going to choose to be at the top of the food chain was not going to have a European origin. That just was not going to happen.
A little bit before our chat started, we talked about like decentering that.
Yes.
And you said that you wanted to talk about your experience in which that didn't happen.
Right. So I don't know who has listened to, first of all, I should say a little bit of a disclaimer. I am the type of person who I'm never going to be horribly upset or offended by anything that happens in any of the formats of my work where it's an adaptation. And as soon as you've ever had an audiobook, you realize that an audiobook is absolutely an adaptation, because they are interpreting things that you didn't even know needed interpreting. Like, you didn't even know there was a different way to say this. This happened with me with Mem, which is set in 1920s Montreal, which of course is a bilingual place. And so I had to give them like a pronunciation guide and all that kind of stuff. So that's what you focus on in terms of how are we going to make this come across the way that you want it to come across. Oh, we need a pronunciation guide. Well, there are all of these different things that nobody asks you about, because when they read it as though, and they just believe that's how you wrote it. So when I was listening to the audiobook for Mem, I'm hearing the way that they're interpreting this dialogue sometimes, and I'd be like, oh, that gives the conversation a completely different sort of like subtext, the way that they choose to read this. And it's not something they would have thought to ask me about, because it's not something you could get wrong. So I had to just sort of enjoy it as it's a completely separate thing, and you're making sort of creative decisions that you don't realize are creative decisions that are going to impact those particular readers, right? But readers are doing that.
But I think that what we're talking about is looking at the way that publishing recenters whiteness, even when the authors try to take it out.
Absolutely.
I wrote a romance novel called Hired, and it's about a guy who's Colombian, and it's literally me writing against the Latino. I wanted to deconstruct the Latin lover.
Yes.
And then my audiobook narrator ended up being somebody who is not Latin doing like a Ricky Ricardo accent. And like,
Okay.
I'm like, my entire book just goes out the window because it's the opposite of what I was trying
Right.
to do.
Well, and so that really happens. That really happens in A Song Below Water's audiobook. And so there are certain aspects of it that you absolutely have some interaction with. And so I chose the narrators. I absolutely love Jennifer and Andrea who read for Tavia and Effie respectively. And I gave them pronunciation guides and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not interacting directly with them, of course. I'm interacting with the producer. So I get all the different tracks or whatever, and I haven't listened to all of them. I was just sort of jumping around, and I was like, I have to listen to the first scene where you meet Gargi. So I get to it, and he has like a British affectation. And I was like,
I mean, I think in my entire life, I've met like 3 Latinx people that in the UK.
I'm like, wait a minute, but I'm like, exactly. And that's the other thing is, so if you read the book, he is coded, he chooses, so that's probably not, shouldn't say that. Anyway, the point is there are things in the book that should let you know that that's not the case. And it's not something you can say that the actors did, because they have to get direction, because they're 2 separate narrators. So if they both do the same thing, they have to have gotten that direction from somebody else.
It's sort of like when you run out of accents to do.
But I'm like, why did he need, who told you he had an accent? Like, if you've read the book, you don't get any impression that he has an accent.
Reading his voice is like, I actually superimposed Goliath's voice because that's my only reference to gargoyles.
And that's perfectly fine for a reader individually to do, but when something is centered for an entire swath of readership because it's a decision made on the back end, it totally undoes my work of intentionally decentering Europe in this book. Yeah. So the whole point of this book is like, sirens are Black women. Mermaids usually spawn below the equator. A loco are a Central African origin in their folklore.
What was your okay, keep going.
But so that was what I was intentionally doing, and it's the context that goes throughout the entire book. So then to realize that even without thinking about it, at different stages, people's natural bent is to just like recenter, Europe or Western, the Western countries, right. Was like, why did you do this? I don't.
And I don't want to make aspiring writers who are watching, sad, like, oh, this is what's going to happen to you. It's just
you just have to
conversation that we need to have as professional authors, so that if our editors are watching, they can take that into account in the next time.
There are all of these different things that have to be decolonized in your own imagination on the editorial side, because I wouldn't have known to say, don't make him British. Like, why would I say that? He's not British in the book.
I didn't know to say, don't give me a Ricky Ricardo accent.
Like, if I had only thought, don't have this guy put on.
I think it is that some things that it's very frustrating. I can't say what I was going to say because it's bad. But it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. So that's the thing that happened. But I will say that it is definitely something that I note, and then I'm like, all right, it's out of my hands. That is a completely different interpretation of my work, and it's definitely not something that is going to like upset me and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's not my book. It's someone reading my book.
I saw online, I wanted to congratulate you in the beginning that your book is already going to second printing.
Yay!
So keep ordering it. If you haven't ordered it and you're watching, there's a link right there.
I know it says out of stock in places, and it doesn't say when it's going to come back in stock. So I think people are like, oh no, I can't get this book. If number one, look at independent bookstores. And if you're here, obviously buy it from this store, please.
Right. Yes, we can help you with that.
Yeah, please do that.
It's like the Oz, like the wizard.
Okay, so was there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now
Yeah.
we are actually running out of
Now
time.
we're actually do have 5 minutes left,
Yeah.
and that went by really fast. But if you have any last minute questions, put them in the side comments or not. But somebody asked what you're working on next. I know that you talked about the sequel of a character that we do not know, but
yes,
you're working on the Gargi Tor.com novella that
now I am mentally right now. I'm working on Gargi's. I'm working on Gargi's novella, but I actually just Danielle, yes. So I just turned in a book, which was announced not horribly long ago, but I am doing I say a remix. I was talking to Danielle about this. There's no way to do a retelling or a reimagining when you're taking something and making it about Black people, because our race and our experience is not skin deep. It's a remix. It's a totally different story, but I am doing the Little Women for the Reclaim. Yes, so there's the Reclaim Classics series that's about to start. I don't remember if it starts in 2021 next year, and my book is the second one. And it's about the March sisters, and they're Black, and it's happening in 1863. I'm keeping it in the same time frame. It's during the Civil War, and so of course it is a completely different story, because if you're going to tell a story about a Black family in 1863, it's not going to be genteel poverty where their biggest concern is like,
getting a book deal?
My limes and my, like, none of that stuff is.
I confess, Little Women is like my least. I never finished it when we were in high school. I just went to Spark Notes.
I know that I never.
So I'm looking forward to your retelling. Your remix of it. I think that's going to be fantastic.
Oh, I'm super excited. The only thing that I think that when you're doing anything based on some other property, like Gwenda Bond said, you really only have to find the elements that are needed to make it identifiable. So the thing that makes Little Women identifiable, number one, is sisterhood, which is what I'm all about. Black sisterhood is like my whole point. So you have the mom, you have the sisters, and then of course you need Lori. And pretty much outside of that, you can do whatever you want, because now we have identified with this set of characters. We understand that this is Little Women.
Yeah. Sorry, Timothée Chalamet fans.
Oh, please. And I never saw that one. That was never going to happen. I did rewatch the 90s one right towards the end of finishing writing. It has nothing to do with my book for the most part, but it's the one that I grew up loving. So
is there a specific genre or a specific genre that you would want to write, or story that you would want to write, that it didn't matter about contracts or submission? Because for me, it was always mermaids in space and Santa Claus erotica, which is my fascination with cryptozoology. So
what just happened? What just happened, JC? That's my question. What just happened here?
Yeah, those are the two things that I would want to write. If like I didn't have to worry about the marketing aspect of it. It's a dream. I'm gonna keep talking about it until I do it.
I would love for you to just do it and not maybe talk about it and just do it.
The title is Santa Claus is Coming to Town.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Miriam just put it in the comments.
Oh, yeah. Wow. All right. Well, I am very uninteresting by comparison. What I do is very sort of like experimental. I like experimental novellas, adult sort of speculative literary stuff. So Miriam actually has what is sort of is something that's super duper important to me. And it's a story that now, again, with how the world's going, it's going to make it look like I was inspired by the world as it is. And unfortunately, this is something that I wrote in like 2014. It's just, we've gone so far downhill so fast that a lot of our really experimental, terrifying stuff looks real. So it's basically a story that is science fiction, but you don't really interact with it as the way that you do with science fiction. It's told through a series of different sort of mediums, because part of it is like an academic treatise. This is where all my geekdom and nerdness comes really to the fore. It's literally an academic treatise that somebody is writing through which you get to see what has changed about the world. It's a world in which an unseen and really outside of the story alien, and that's just the extent of what we call them, has offered Earth soul immortality in exchange for our dreams, because they keep having these near extinction experiences, and they have sort of through process of elimination deduced that the reason they keep getting so close to extinction is because they don't experience emotion, they don't experience emotional intimacy, they don't so they have given the Earth soul immortality in exchange for us doing this sort of dream drive. The problem, of course, is that from viewing us from afar or whatever, they've decided to delegate the task of distribution to the American government. So basically they gave the United States immortality. And of course, the United States is going to make sure that that works out for all of us,
right,
including our own people. Sure.
Jeff Bezos is going to take that and run with it.
Right, absolutely, and he's going to distribute it evenly, and it's great. One of the things that I will say right off the bat is that there was supposed to be sort of like a global, and all of this is told through transcripts or through this treatise or through news articles or something. And it was basically they were supposed to create like a global conglomerate and get rid of this idea of nations and territories and stuff. And so North America was supposed to become North America. And somehow that stalled after the United States and Canada connected. And we never got to the part where Mexico was absorbed into that. So we're now the United States and provinces and Mexico, and for some reason we just haven't gotten there yet.
I feel like you just described like the first dystopian that I actually want to read.
So it's I will say that it's not a light or happy story, but it is brief. So, and I think that's what novellas I think are really wonderful for. That kind of intense,
really weird.
You can get real weird and real dark, and then just be like, okay, you're done, you can go.
Okay, so I know that we're out of time, but I just want you to be able to give your final statements and maybe book recommendations, other than obviously buy your book.
Buy my book, buy all of Zoraida's books, because there are so many series. Now there are so many categories. You can get MG, you can get young adult,
you can get smut.
And then, pre-order Santa Claus is Coming to Town. But the things that I obviously am extremely excited about, pre-order, I don't know if you can pre-order Legendborn by Tracy Dion yet, but if you can, please do that. If you're looking for MG, Karen Strong last year had a book that was like one of the best, literally on a list of best of 2019, and it's called Just South of Home, and it's like a Southern sort of horror, and it also is set in amongst our real world things that we are dealing with. I think it'd be great for a lot of kids right now who are maybe confused about the world and how it works right now. So those are two. And then, of course, Latrice McKinney, Ella McKinney, is going to be having her third book come out. So if you haven't read A Blade So Black and Crown So Cursed, or is the Crown So Cursed the third?
That's the third one. A Blade So Black, A Dream So Dark.
A Dream So Dark. Okay. So A Dream So Dark. And so get those and read those in preparation. And then also The Bells is going to be having a third book coming out at some point.
Wait, was that announced?
I heard it announced somewhere, so I thought it was announced. But the point is, get the first two books and be ready.
I think we already talked about it on Deadline City. So listen to our podcast, Deadline City.
Multiple times she's talked about it. I'm thinking this is okay to do.
Yeah, we're terrible at keeping secrets, I think. But anyway, so thank you so much for letting me talk to you about your debut YA.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. That was an amazing conversation. Thanks to everybody in the comments. That was awesome. I love the energy and all the excitement. So y'all are funny as hell, which is great. Thank you. So you can definitely buy all of the books via that green button. But very important note, if you want to get A Song Below Water, we have them in stock in our store, ready to ship out. But because of the confusing pandemic problems, our website says that they're back ordered because it's based on inventory at a warehouse and not what's literally on our shelves.
Okay.
So all you need to do is call us or send an email to info, I'm putting it in the chat right now, at charisbooksandmore.com. and just say "A Song Below Water" in the subject line, and we will ship it out to you. We also are going to ship out some swag to you if you order it from us. So
Do you have the enamel pins?
they are en route to us now. Yes.
You guys, if you can get these enamel pins, you have to order from them.
They're beautiful.
You want these. You want them.
You should tweet that too, sending them to to Charis.
Yes. They are en route via Tor. So thank you to Tor. Thank you.
Oh, that's awesome.
Charis is primarily individually donor sponsored. That's how we do all of our events. I know folks are all over the place with money right now, so no stress. All of our events are always free. But if you magically have a little extra right now and you want to support literary community, I put that little donation prompt in there. We really appreciate you. No amount of money is too small. And finally, if you, no matter where you are located, we would love for you to follow Charis's Crowdcast channel so that you can keep up with our other events. Yes, the follow button is up there.
I see it.
Yeah, we're doing all kind of fun stuff. Our next event tomorrow night is actually on Zoom. It's called Raceman, and it is about the legacy of civil rights history in Atlanta. It's going to be really, really good. We'd love for y'all to come to that. We have several YA events coming up, including the launch for a book in the Simon verse. So if you're a Love Simon fan, that's coming up. And we just announced today that we're doing an event with the author from who wrote Dumpling.
Julie Murphy.
Yeah, Julie Murphy. Thank you. It's been a long day. So we're doing her Faith Taking Flight, which is a queer plus sized
superhero.
So we're really excited about that. So we got a lot of good stuff coming up, and we'd love for y'all to just be a part of our digital community wherever you are in the world. We're really glad that you spent time celebrating some joyful stories. And thank you both. This was really great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for coming. Bye, Anna. Bye, Jennifer. I love you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Be safe. Take care.